And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
And a personal foul on number 99 of the defense after he tackled the quarterback. He's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and here bringing you another edition of After Further Review. Thanks so much for spending your time here with me, and we got a lot to talk about. Still doing shows from home, still doing remote shows for the time being. Coronavirus is still locking stuff down, and obviously there's a lot of uncertainty around there, so we're doing the best we can from the setup at home, and having fun doing it. It's really given me an opportunity to spend some time tweaking the technical aspects of the show and kind of figuring out the whole podcasting setup and how that works, and making it as refined as possible. And actually, I have been able to take the time to go back and back catalog all of our old episodes. So all 97 previous AFR episodes are now up as podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, the service that I use to host the podcast. So wherever you listen to podcasts, you can access After Further Review. Just search for it in iTunes, Spotify, wherever. You can subscribe and have new episodes automatically downloaded to your device. And actually, there's a few new features within the Anchor app that are pretty nifty. You can actually be sent now a little text message, and in that text message there will be a link that enables you to record a question or thought that you have about a particular topic or something about the show that you want to have discussed, and you can send that in to me through that text link, and then I can actually incorporate that into the show and then have it play on air, and then actually kind of engage a little bit and answer those questions and talk about those comments that you might have. So if you're interested in something like that, like I said, we'll be sending out that link on social media, on our social media platform shortly. It'll be on Instagram, it'll be on Twitter and Facebook, and you can access it there. But I want to go ahead and spend today's show talking about something that's been bounced around, obviously, the last few weeks now, as more and more athletic departments continue to grapple with COVID-19 and the implications of it, and you're seeing, schools, universities across the country, they have announced that they're going to be online through the summer. I think maybe a handful of schools have indicated the possibility of returning to classes on campus in the fall, but nothing has been confirmed as far as I know, and that pretty much transfers over to athletics because a lot of athletic directors have indicated that they really don't want to play these games without fans. That would be the least attractive option besides outright canceling a season, right? That's kind of the nuclear option it's on the table, obviously, depending on how things continue to develop with coronavirus. And it's certainly something that may be considered, but it's the last resort, right? Canceling the season and giving athletic departments, basically very little income, because most schools, right, their bread and butter is football. That's how they're making most of their athletic department budget, whether it's through ticketing or sponsorships or bowl games. And a lot of these FCS schools rely on games with FBS opponents, to help keep afloat. And there's lots of them out there that they schedule one or two of these games a year. That brings in $2 or $3 million, and that helps foot their bill. So it's extremely important, not just for the FBS schools, but also working down through the divisions and at the FCS level and beyond. But it's really interesting reading out some, over some different articles that have been posted recently, and lots of athletic directors, coaches, commissioners have kind of weighed in over the past few weeks, and obviously it's a fluid situation, right? As new information comes out, cases crop up, or there's a second wave, or what have you, they're going to have to make changes. It has to be malleable to a certain extent. So there's really no consensus, and that's one of the things that I think we're going to continue to see. I think because this is becoming more and more a regional issue, right? I mean, it's just a fact that it's not hitting states like Alabama as hard as New York. It's not hitting states like Colorado as hard as California. So it's really going to come down to the officials within that particular state, right? The governor, the health officials, but it's also going to come down to conference commissioners. I think people are overlooking the significant role that these commissioners and these conferences play over the schools that are in that conference, right? I mean, the SEC might make a decision to play a full schedule, and the Pac-12 say, you know what, we're just going to only focus on conference games this year. Our goal is to hit the conference quota. That's what we're going to try and do. Personally, I think that's the route that we're going to see conferences begin to take, is as this situation continues to develop, and it will over the course of the summer. I mean, look, we're only in May. It's May 5th, actually Cinco de Mayo today, and it's hard to believe that conferences would pass judgment this soon for stuff that's going to, I think it's slated to start August 28th or 29th. I'm not sure what the exact start date is scheduled for currently, but I feel like you're going to see conferences meet with their respective schools, talk things over, see where each state is at. Because again, just thinking about this, let's take the ACC for an example, because I want to say they're probably the most spread out conference geographically. You've got Miami, and then you've got Boston College and Syracuse. I mean, that's the entire, I mean, yes, it's the Atlantic coast, I get it, but it's the entire eastern seaboard. There's a lot of I mean, there's thousands of miles between those schools. And so, look, the reality is what's going on in New York, where Syracuse, where Boston College is very different from what you might see at Florida State or from Clemson or from Virginia Tech. And that applies to every conference to a certain extent. I feel like the ACC is an especially good example because it's spread out tremendously. And maybe there are conferences that are close to it, but the point of this all is that I think you're going to see conferences, commissioners get together, have meetings with athletic directors, with university officials, and with health officials of the states that their schools are located in, and they're going to have to come to a consensus about what they want to do for a football schedule. And then the other side of this discussion is, how long do you really need to prepare? Because look, it's not just about two teams that converge on a football field on a Saturday for 3.5 hours. There are days and weeks and months of planning that these athletic departments and schools have to do to work with law enforcement for traffic and ticketing and concessions and planning and small businesses, especially in college towns, rely tremendously on that tourism that they get in the fall. And so, it really becomes a question of how far in advance do we need to have an answer by in order to have a season start on time, quote, start on time. And the consensus really seems to be about 2 months. And, that's what a couple different coaches have indicated. I know I saw a quote by James Franklin, Penn State's head coach, after he consulted with his staff. They felt like, it would take about 6 to 8 weeks. 8 weeks probably more on the conservative end. 6 weeks maybe a little bit sooner. But then you have coaches out there like Herm Edwards who made the point where he's like, look, and this is a quote here. He said, you're going to need 2 months to get these guys back going again before you even consider putting them on a field and asking them to play football. When you rush back, that's when you get the soft tissue injuries, the hamstrings, the Achilles, tendons, groins, because you haven't done anything. And he did make a really good comment, I thought, about how pro players, have that the sense of, I need to work out, this is the off season, but also they have the access to these facilities. And it's important to remember, now that the colleges and universities have been shut down and cleared of students, these players don't have access to those facilities anymore. So I know Alabama had sent their players home with an Apple Watch to keep track of fitness goals. Not every school can afford that, right? I mean, there's only a handful of schools out there that are going to be able to send their players home with Apple Watches. So there's obviously a disparity in terms of how much a school can do for their players, but then there's also, what kind of regimen do these strength and conditioning coaches need to kind of have in place so that when they come back to campus, they're ready to go. It's just I think it's a case by case basis. But I think, again, if you're looking at that 6 to 8 week timetable, let's go with that 8-week timetable. And the season rather is slated to start at the end of August. That means that you really need, by mid-June to late June, you really need to have a good idea of whether or not universities and schools are going to be open and people are going to be willing to travel, because that's the other thing too, is you might see decreased attendance at a lot of these schools that are either consistently come out of the middle of the pack or have been having a rough couple of years, or even schools that are kind of up and coming. I mean, it just might be that attendance suffers across the board, across all sporting events, collegiate, high school, professional. It may be down for a couple of years. I mean, because people are understandably concerned about being packed in a arena, stadium, what have you, with tens of thousands of other people. I mean, football games, like think of the Big Ten stadiums. Think of the Horseshoe. Think of the Big House. Think of Happy Valley. Yeah, there's a lot of other big stadiums in the SEC, the ACC, all over, but the Big Ten has the 3 biggest college football stadiums in the country, and it's over 100,000 people. I mean, it's massive. And so it might be that they have trouble filling seats, even if the games go on as scheduled, right? Because everyone, at this point, expects that either second wave or the kind of the coming back in the fall. Again, a lot of speculation, obviously. But that's something that athletic departments have to consider. They have to consider it. And I think that's why you have seen so many schools push back that season ticket deadline, the season ticket deadline request, because they know, we have to be flexible with this particular situation. And, it's really going to be interesting to see how these schools go about getting their guys back in football shape, how they do their conditioning, what sort of audibles do they call for their fall camps, and how that looks, and what will the NCAA be willing to compromise on? Like, how flexible will they be? We've already seen them display some goodwill towards the spring athletes, the winter, I believe, and spring athletes, and offering those seniors another year of eligibility. But it's not just about the physical preparation. It's about that learning curve for those freshmen, and learning the new plays, and understanding the system, and understanding the culture, and getting used to the campus. And I can't imagine graduating right now. All those seniors, whether it's high school or college, that's just going to be a tremendously difficult few months. But it's the mental preparation is equivalently important to the physical preparation. And so, it's going to be challenging. It's really going to be challenging for a lot of these schools to get prepared. And we may see, you think about this now, conference play usually starts week 2, week 3 for some schools. It could be ugly. We could see some upsets, right? We could see some good FCS teams, if those games are able to be scheduled, playing some FBS opponents, and there's not as much disparity talent-wise, because they just haven't had enough time to really get that edge. And yes, the FBS rosters are inherently more talented than those FCS rosters, but still, it's certainly possible. You could see some wacky results from the first couple of weeks of the season, just based off the fact that schools are scrambling still, and they may treat the first couple games like a fall. I mean, you honestly, I mean, remember now, we haven't had, we didn't have spring games. It might be that schools look at those first couple weeks, anything before conference play, as basically a fall camp, kind of almost like a preseason NFL game where you're trying things out. You might run a couple of trick plays. You might do something fancy. You may sub out, like get your second string guy. Like you may do a lot of different things that you wouldn't normally do in those kinds of situations. But I don't know. I mean, again, that's a lot of speculation, but it's certainly a piece to that puzzle. It's certainly something that I think we could see. And, again, the other concern right now is, and this was pointed out by the American Athletic Conference commissioner, that idea of an interrupted season, right? Where you start the season on time, things, seem to progress and teams are getting better and everything seems to kind of be hitting that normalcy point. And then you have that second wave that everyone is so worried about that could disrupt the whole season. Because remember, when this all happened, we were primed and ready for March Madness. I mean, we were on the tail end of the conference tournaments. I think Selection Sunday was like either the next week. It was close. I mean, it was really close. All the days and months and weeks have kind of meshed together with all this quarantine, but we were close to Selection Sunday and really still in the middle of the season, right? We're on the tail end of it, but we were gearing up for the postseason. So what if we see that, right? What if we get to late October, early November, maybe even mid-November? Like let's say that we hit that second wave around that Thanksgiving rivalry week period. Teams have probably already played 9-10 games. They're gearing up for the postseason. They know, some of these teams know, hey, we're bowl eligible. A lot of schools are prepping for conference championships if they've already clinched their division. Maybe a few are even kind of eyeing that college football playoff berth, and then boom, you get hit with that second wave, and then all of a sudden, there's no more football. You're done. You're back to square one. And then what do you do, right? In that situation, are you going to try and reschedule the games for the spring? Like what, or do you just cancel them? I mean, how do you go about solving that problem? I think is really an interesting storyline in all of this is what are athletic departments, what are conference commissioners going to do to be as flexible as possible with all of this going on? And, that's actually another point that I've seen mentioned around is that we might have a spring-only schedule for football. And we might not see any 2020 football games played besides the ones that were played in this past bowl season. It might be that, we can't, if universities decide they're going to stay closed, classes are going to be online, people are not going to be allowed to return to campus, then you might see a situation where all of our games are going to be scheduled in a time crunch in the spring in addition to basketball, and kind of mashing that all together. And, what's really interesting, and this is from coming from ESPN Stats and Info, they have that no major college football team has played a game between February and July since the 19th century, like a competitive football game. Now, I don't know what constitutes a major college football team. I don't know if that means FBS and FCS. I don't know of any D2 and D3 schools playing games in the middle of February, but maybe they just don't have the records for it. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe they only have the records for these major college football teams. But either way, it's been since the 1800s, right? It's been a minute. But that spring 2021 model that is out there, that exists, could avoid some of the obstacles that you're already having to deal with in fall of 2020. Because campuses are going to be likely opened up by then. Teams will have ample time to prepare. They'll have a a long layoff, right? I mean, that would be a long, long layoff, but you would have enough time to kind of get back in that groove or somewhat before you started playing games in the spring. And then also on the health side of all this, you would have, time for improved testing and treatments, and maybe a vaccine gets developed or it's near being developed. I mean, again, that's not my area of expertise, but it could possibly be on the horizon by that point in time, up spring of 2021. And I think the reality is that it would be foolish to ignore it as a possibility. Again, when you're looking at something like this, it's such an abnormality. It's so unforeseen. It's so unprecedented. None of us to mind. Nothing has ever happened like this in my lifetime. I'd say it's probably been since World War II, since we have seen this type of disruption in normal American life, especially when it relates to sporting events. And again, I wasn't alive during that time period, but that's just based off of people I've talked to that I know who were alive or things that I've read and researched. But again, I think that spring 2021 model has potential. It certainly has potential. And you might have to start off and say, okay, the goal is 8 games or the goal is 10 games. You may not be able to play that full 15 game schedule. It just might not be feasible. And then here's that other side of the coin to the spring 2021. A lot of these schools, especially like the Big Ten, it's going to be very difficult from a weather perspective. I mean, you talk about some of the weather that these schools are going to have to deal with. It would be very challenging. I mean, it would be very challenging. The weather up in those colder climates. I mean, you got conferences like the Big Ten, the MAC, any of those northern schools. I mean, they're used to finishing their seasons right on snowy, frigid fields. It's getting pretty cold. I mean, for people in the South, it's getting pretty cold. I know for them it's normal, but just imagine what a February or early March kickoff would look like in Minneapolis or Madison, where Wisconsin plays. I mean, there's going to be, get your snow shovels. I mean, that's going to be football in the Big Ten in the spring. I mean, if you play a game in February like that, it would be a nightmare. And this is a quote. This is a quote from a Big Ten coach that it would be very difficult to draw fans to football games in Michigan in January or February. That sounds like a nightmare, and that's a direct quote. And that's true. I mean, it would pose a significant challenge, and it would be something that a lot of those northern schools would have to deal with in figuring out, the logistics, because there's so much that goes into planning and preparing for a college football game, let alone a season. So, that's another thing that needs to be considered. And then also, how does it work with the NFL? I mean, are the NFL and college football going to do this in tandem? Like, at what point is Roger Goodell going to pick up the phone and call some of these commissioners and say, okay, what do we, what we need to have? Because I personally feel like these two are so interconnected at this point, especially big-time college football on the FBS level, that if the NFL plays their regular season at the same time, like let's just say without fans, and then all of a sudden the Super Bowl ends in February, but you're still playing college football games in like April and May, what are you going to do about the draft? How does that, and again, also talking about eligibility, it would be very interesting to see what sort of solutions are brought to the table by both college football commissioners and the NFL and the NCAA, right? This needs to be a multiple-pronged approach, because it's not going to work if one conference says, okay, we're going to play a regular season in the fall. Let's say the SEC. Let's just say the SEC is like, you know what? We're gonna go ahead. We're gonna play regular season, same amount of games in the fall, no fans, but it's gonna be regularly scheduled programming. And then the ACC says, well, we're gonna play a condensed schedule, and then the Pac-12 and the Big Ten say we're going to play in the spring. Like it's not going to work. It's gonna, and then you have another wrinkle to this. I mean, the more we discuss this, right, the more wrinkles pop up, and the more flags for potential conflict is. What do you do if you're an independent? What do you do if you're Navy? What do you do if you're Army? What do you do if you're Notre Dame? I mean, yes, Notre Dame kind of has that ACC schedule, but still technically an independent in football, and so it could be really, really difficult to schedule these games and figure out a way to make all of that work. And again, we may very likely see another surge of cases between that December to February timeline. It's certainly possible. And the thing is, I think it's important to remember, is as we've seen with this whole COVID-19 coronavirus, I mean, anything's possible. Who would have thought 2 months ago that we would be sitting here talking about playing college football in February of 2021? If you'd have mentioned that at the national championship in January, nobody would have believed you. I don't think anybody really would have. I mean, it was already taking root. Obviously, the virus was in China at the time, but it was not really on the radar in the mainstream view here in America. So it's really going to be challenging, I think, for a lot of these schools. I think right now, one of the more realistic options is playing games with either reduced capacity stadiums or no fans at all. I mean, we've seen a couple different sporting leagues. NASCAR has announced that they're going to run races for the time being without fans. They're making their return very soon. Now, obviously, that's not attractive from a financial ticketing perspective and tailgating and all the other things and small businesses in the area that rely on that tourism. That's not an attractive prospect at all, but it's still a realistic one. It's one that's definitely on the table, and it may be a lot more feasible to make sure that it's safe for the football players and the staff and the coaches, rather than it's safe for 40,000 people that showed up from 6 different states to watch a game and converge on one town for 12 hours and then everybody leaves. Like you take it for granted until you can't do it anymore, and then all of a sudden you're thinking about it and you're going, whoa, wait a minute. I mean, most of these schools, I mean, it's like average fan base, ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, and you got probably 60, 70, 80,000 people who are going to the game, then maybe another 30 or 40,000 that are coming to tailgate and check out the campus or see the town, or they're visiting, or whatever. I mean, those kinds of small college towns can get exposed to. I mean, if someone has the virus or is carrying it and then comes to it can spread like wildfire. So it's really going to be interesting to see how these schools work with their local officials and government officials and health officials to make sure that everything is as safe as possible. But going back to this original kind of discussion is what are we expecting to see in the fall, or what are we expecting to see for the next college football season? And I think the answer is we don't really know, but the best options out there right now are you play a schedule without fans, you play a condensed schedule, or you play a schedule in the spring. It's really hard to say right now which one of those has the most momentum. Certainly we all know which one people would prefer, right? We would prefer to play games, everyone's in the stadium, it's packed house, business as usual, everything's fine. But that might just not be a realistic thing for us to be doing this fall. Now, maybe next year, maybe fall of 2021, life is back to normal, and that would be fantastic. But it just remains to be seen. and it's really going to be interesting. Like I said, because I personally feel like how this is handled is likely going to be a regional thing, and you're going to see a lot of coordination. You're going to see a lot of schools and conferences work with other schools and conferences, but at the end of the day, I think these commissioners are going to have a lot of sway over how it's handled, what schools do, how they implement procedures, and, maybe a lot of these conferences vote or elect to reduce the number of conference games or try and reduce travel as much as possible. I mean, it just might not be feasible to have a 15-game schedule. I mean, think about it. You're playing 12 regular season games. You got that conference championship. You got the semifinal, and then you got the I mean, that's 15 games. At most 7 are going to be, did I do the math right? Yeah, I think 7 are going to be home games. If you got a 12-game regular season, sometimes 6 home games, maybe 7 if you're, a big school and you're paying smaller schools to come play at you rather. 7 games are going to be at home. And then you got the other 5 road games in the regular season. You got a 6th road game at the conference championship. And then, 7, 8 for the playoffs. So, I mean, over half your season will be on the road. That's a lot of travel. And it just might not be doable right now. So, I don't know. It's interesting discussion for sure, and it'll be very fluid. I mean, I expect this to change, and probably 2-3 weeks from now, everything that I've said could be completely out of date, and hopefully we'll have a better idea of what it's going to look like, come this fall. But, I mean, like I said, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, my favorite part about all of this is engaging with people that listen, that watch it, that have an opinion, right? That want to talk college football, want to talk about anything and everything. And so if you're interested in kind of having that voice on the show, or there's something that you want me to discuss, or something that you want to talk about, be on the lookout for that link that I'm going to post on our social media pages. And again, you're just going to click that link. It'll take you to a web browser. You can record for, I believe, up to a minute, a question or comment or anything like that, and it just sends it straight to me through Anchor. I'll see it on my end, and then I can actually build that question into the podcast. So then on the next episode, I can play that question and, address it, answer it, discuss it, anything like that. So it's a really exciting feature, and I'm really happy that Anchor has introduced that. And allowed me to kind of tweak, like I said, and modify some of the technical aspects of this show. And again, it's been a learning curve for a lot of people, especially me, because I mean, we were doing shows at the Rebel Radio Studios at the start of the semester, and then obviously that came to a screeching halt, and so now it's been a remote podcast style show for at least a couple months now, and it might be very well over the summer. We'll just kind of have to see what happens in the fall and how things transpire. But for the time being, like I said, want to hear your opinions, want to hear your comments. We'll try and post some more on the social media platforms and get y'all engaged. And like I said, always love hearing from people, and it's awesome that people enjoy and appreciate the show. Inspires me to keep doing it, and I have a lot of fun with it. It's a definite passion project of mine. But like I said, we'll have this episode up shortly. Definitely interested to hear your comments or any questions you may have about it. Been a lot of fun though, talking this one over with you, and always fun bringing you another edition of After Further Review. Hard to believe this is our 98th episode, coming up on the big triple-digit anniversary. Might have something special planned for that. I'm not sure what we're going to do, but we're going to do something. And stay tuned. Check the social media for it. It'll be coming your way. But stay safe out there. And again, really appreciate you listening. And thanks so much. But this has been another edition of After Further Review. Thanks for listening.